Over in the pages of Marvel Comics, I think readers are now more excited than they have been in a long time to check out the Odinson Thor's upcoming comic book series. I really think this is due in large part to the excellent creative team over on the title, including prolific Marvel writer Al Ewing, as well as Marvel's Stormbreaker Martin Coccolo. Over in Marvel's Thor Annual, we even got to preview this upcoming Thor comic book series, as Al Ewing was able to show Thor restore his hammer of Mjolnir and return over to some classic threads that we're also going to see in the pages of Immortal Thor. My name is Ariko Braddock, and today, let's go ahead and see how Immortal Thor's debut issue and check if it's able to live up to the excellent creative team behind the series. Before we get deeper into the video, I want to encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button over on our review if you enjoy our content. Al Ewing, Martin Coccolo, and Alex Ross give the God of Thunder the immortal treatment. In Norse myths, they called him the Thunderer. Vuer has he been called, and Hloriddi. The gods know him as Asgard's king, keeper of Mjolnir, hero of the tales. When injustice grips the earth and ancient powers bring down the sky, he fights for those who cannot. And when the tale is done, we all know what it will cost him. This is the story of the Immortal Thor, plus a bonus page written by Jonathan Hickman, Who Are the Gods? So the Immortal Thor issue 1 is written, of course, from Al Ewing, and it also features art from Martin Coccolo. In addition, we have colors from Matthew Wilson, letters from VC's Joe Sabino, and we have a cover coming in directly from Alex Ross. Before we get to the cover, I also want to mention that Jonathan Hickman wrote a Gods page over in this issue as well. So here's a look at Alex Ross's epic cover showing Thor headed back over to his original comic book costume on the cover for Immortal Thor. And I want to extend a quick thank you over to Adventures in Poor Taste for posting our preview of the issue so incredibly fast here. So I really love the way that Martin Coccolo was able to render this opening page on the comic book issue. This page actually showcases a mysterious character who comes back into the fold late within the issue. It's pretty thrilling to see how Al Ewing has kind of arranged the script, as well as how Martin Coccolo delivers really bright pencils in some spots and definitely imbues some darker elements into the numerous villains lingering throughout the background over in Immortal Thor issue 1 here. We also got to see a lot of moments between Thor, the Warriors 3, and Hildegard battling against the Frost Giants over in the tale. I think Coccolo did a great job lending that sense of scale to the Frost Giants. I think this page is excellent as well, as there's quite a lot of prose over on this page from Al Ewing. Yet, I think Coccolo still finds an interesting way to lay out some of these sequences and make the wordy script from Ewing really come alive in some of these portions. Also, it was quite thrilling on this next page to see some of the Warriors 3 and Hildegard introduced throughout the issue. I thought the way they kind of interacted with Thor throughout the tale was pretty interesting here, but I really appreciated the amount of shading that Coccolo lent to some of the faces, details, and just the amount of hair that he renders over on Volstag's face in the issue, I think, is quite remarkable here. One thing to say about this Thor issue that I think is perfectly exemplified by this piece of artwork that we have up on the screen is that Thor is a very kind of battle-worn character throughout the Marvel Universe. In Marvel's core continuity, he's been through so much as a hero. And in some pages, I was a little bit off-put by how Al Ewing and Coccolo chose to visually render this character, because Thor is so far removed from the 1960s and 70s and has now really come into his own as his own sort of character over in the Marvel Universe. So watching him be so jovial in certain moments, I think almost took me out of the series a little bit, especially considering what writer Torunn Grønbekk has been doing in the main Thor series, and considering some of the recent runs on the character as well, even extending to the beginning of the Donny Cates run. It just feels like the personality for Thor has changed drastically through the course of this issue. Immortal Thor issue 1 actually dives really deep into some of what Loki is going through. And I thought it was really interesting how we got to see Loki use his wand and restore some of these elements of Asgard. I think Al Ewing had some really interesting commentary on how this franchise is trying to rebuild and restore itself, which definitely goes along with Thor's more jovial personality throughout the comic book issue. One major pointer that I also want to give over to Immortal Thor is how it was able to utilize some of the plot threads from recent Marvel comic books when Thor was interacting with some of just the rest of the world over on Midgard. It was pretty thrilling to see Thor get tangled up with some of the forces of the Marvel Universe. And I don't want to spoil the one villain that got me really excited, because if you've been following any of the content on our channel recently, I have a feeling that you'll know exactly what we're trying to get at here. So over in the context of Marvel Comics' Immortal Thor series, I'm a little bit torn on some of the material, because I think the first page introduces a villain who lends some really intriguing plot threads over to the comic book towards the last couple pages, but I think there are so many kind of cursory scenes with Thor where the introduction and world of Asgard is being fleshed out yet again. Readers at this point should have a good understanding of elements like the Rainbow Bridge, as well as Lady Sif, and some of the other elements of the Thor property like the Warriors 3. And having Al Ewing go through all of these the way he did in the issue almost felt a little bit remedial to me. I wanted to see Al Ewing return to some of these characters with a strong plot thread, a new dynamic, a new story, status quo direction for some of these characters as well. And I don't think we get that for the most part in the issue. There's definitely some scenes and some characters who bring out more interesting elements of the book than others. I'm looking at Loki especially, who I think adds some detail and perspective to the issue that some of the other Asgardians and Thor supporting characters don't. Thankfully, though, I don't think this issue ends up getting too dry, because the threat of the villains looming in the background, it's constantly re-explored throughout the context of the series. I would say, though, if you are a reader who is looking to really see what the full scope of what Al Ewing and Martin Coccolo are going to end up bringing to the Immortal Thor, you are likely going to have to wait for some upcoming issues. And I do think the introduction of the villains in the last couple pages adds so many fascinating plot threads to the series and flesh out what looks to be the next set of issues from Immortal Thor. But I think for the most part here, I'm really looking to see how this creative team is able to spin stories in the moment with these core Asgardian characters to tell some interesting narratives without messing with the Thor property too much here. Really hoping that in some future issues, Al Ewing and Martin Coccolo will find a way to tell Thor stories that are a little bit interesting, that have lower stakes within the story. It feels like in future issues, as we mentioned up top, that the status quo of this book can get really, really dark. But again, I think when we saw writer Jason Aaron really tackle the Thor property, there was just this jovial and regal sense to the way that Thor interacted with others. And I hope as Al Ewing gets deeper and deeper into the narrative with Thor, that more of those elements can be introduced. I would also like to see Coccolo render the Thor property with a little bit more grit as well. So at the end of the day here, I'm finding myself a little bit more torn on the Immortal Thor than I'd like. While I'm pretty confident that some of the future issues of the series are going to introduce those plot elements and showcase some really harrowing fights over between Thor and some of the villains introduced within this comic book, I do think that Ewing and Coccolo are arranging all of the narratives and plot threads to really introduce some big things over to the Immortal Thor. I think as long as you set your expectations in gear and prepare for a story that is nowhere near as dark, at least as of this point, as the Immortal Hulk, that you can definitely find something interesting within the pages of Immortal Thor. Before we go here, I also wanted to mention one last thing about Thor's outfit that he's actually gotten in the annual for the series. While I do think it's interesting that Thor now is wearing his classic costume, I think that reverting him back to his old threads, lose out on some of the characterization that several Thor creators have lent to the character, starting with that JMS and Olivier Coipel run over on the property. I know that Thor's classic costume is making a lot of Marvel fans happy, so glad that the publisher is serving some of the fandom. Just thought it might be interesting to add in my own 2 cents here. But I want to know from you, are you as excited about this issue of Immortal Thor as I am? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you so much for coming to check out our video review over on Immortal Thor, and we'll be back to talk comic books, Thor, Asgard, and the Marvel Universe in the very near future. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.